Now, I just spent 6 months running to be mayor of London, and I got a taste of politics, a taste. And in America, you look at America now, and you see a few hard fork opportunities, right? And again, there's also innovation there.
Yeah.
So look at the way Florida and Texas dealt with the pandemic, and they chose different things to do versus California and New York, and they got different results and different economies, and people move there on the back of it, which is kind of maybe a hard fork vote in some way. If you move from one protocol to another, call it a state. So you can see how politics has this as well. When I ran for London, you can't necessarily hard fork London, although there are, 32 boroughs and each one makes some independent decision making. But also politics can be a little frustrating. There's a book written in America called The Tyranny of the Majority, right? I mean, majority rule sounds good and it's how democracy works.
Exactly, and you can't fork. You're kind of like stuck. So you have to like grow the minority. But in Web3, what happens is that with decentralization, you can basically take that code and fork it and say that, okay, this is our vision, this is how we're going to differentiate. If you're early, you get more incentivized. And people follow. Some people follow just because of the incentives, and some people follow because of the frustration. But this kind of like a forking ensures that you have an ecosystem where if there isn't large enough consensus, which is important in decentralization, because otherwise you are back into the centralized model. So what happens is that you don't have wide consensus, you see forks and they evolve something. And some of the forks might be opportunistic, they don't go anywhere. I'm not sure like many of the Bitcoin forks will survive at some point, but then again, when you have, let's say, forks on Ethereum on certain protocols, there might be like a different way of building things, and that's totally fine. So I think that will be like the key thing. And we don't see forks often because it's very radical measure. It's kind of like rage quitting from a DAO, but it's just a way of when you need to radically take a new direction of what you're building.
Yeah. And again, you spoke earlier about how composability is a really important piece, which means what you build is a piece of Lego that other people can use to go create whatever they want. And the more you can make it complete and not owned by you, that's a big part of the protocol, as well as you like this concept of immutable code, of having this piece of code out there that's a smart contract in and of itself and does something, and again, doesn't have...
And no one can change it,
right.
That's the kind of like perfect thing to do. But there's also issues related to that. I think like a perfect protocol is when you build something, only the most necessary part of the protocol, and deploy it and see what other people will build. So you have this kind of like a protocol, I would say like experimentation market fit or protocol market fit, where you try something and see how the community reacts and what they can build. Because if you start to build everything in a monolithic way, what happens is you get a community of more of like a spectators or maybe parameters governors. But what you want to essentially do is that you don't want to only decentralize people who govern the protocol, but you want to decentralize also people who build the protocol. So that way, kind of like if the governance wants to make different kinds of decisions and the builders aren't happy, you don't have anyone to implement those changes. And for example, in our protocol, you can delegate the voting power. So if you are a holder of Aave, you can delegate to someone so-called protocol politician, but you can also delegate the proposition power, which means that as if you look into the traditional system, usually like the lawmaking is monopolized in a way that you have one lawmaker and then you have politicians who vote in different kind of like ways. But delegating proposition power means that you make the code makers, lawmakers to compete on the proposals which these protocol politicians end of the day vote. And that's why the decentralization of builders is like the last and biggest component that we need to kind of like work upon in the whole space. But in the perfect manner, you create a protocol that just has the essentials and see how others will build on top. That's like the most like valuable scenario.